My daughter called me at 3 inches the morning. Not a text, not a voicemail, a call, and she let it ring until I picked up. Dad. Her voice was tight, controlled, the way she sounds in a courtroom when she's about to say something that changes everything. Don't talk. Just listen. Is Marcus home right now? Marcus. My son-in-law, my daughter's husband of 6 years. The man I'd welcomed into my home, my family, my life. He's asleep, I said. Audrey, Go to your office. Lock the door. Don't let him know you're awake. I was 64 years old, a retired civil engineer who'd spent 31 years building bridges across the state of Ohio. I didn't scare easily. But something in my daughter's voice at 3 in the morning made me slide out of bed quietly, pad down the hallway in my socks, and lock myself in the room I used for my woodworking books and old project files. I'm here, I whispered. Talk to me. I've been going through Marcus's financial records, she said. Dad, he's been forging your signature on loan documents. He took out a second mortgage on your house 8 months ago, $140,000. I sat down in my chair. The room felt like it was tilting. That's not possible, I said. I would have known. He set up a mail forwarding address. All the statements go to a P.O. box in Dayton. Dad, the payments are being made from an account in your name that you didn't open. She exhaled slowly. I found this because he asked me to help him update your estate documents last week. Something felt wrong. I started digging. I thought about the past 8 months. Marcus handling my mail when my back was giving me trouble. Marcus offering to manage my online accounts after I had that problem with my password. Marcus suggesting I sign a stack of forms that he said were routine updates to my insurance. Marcus, who had been living in my house for the past year while he and my daughter got back on their feet. Marcus, who I had trusted completely because he was family. Audrey, I said, does your brother know? I called you first. Call him. My son, Raymond, was a senior investigator with the Ohio Attorney General's office, Financial Crimes Division. He'd spent 12 years prosecuting exactly the kind of fraud I was apparently sitting in the middle of. I stayed in that room until morning. Raymond arrived at 7, before Marcus woke up. He sat across from me at the kitchen table with a legal pad and went through everything methodically, the way he always did. No emotion, just facts. Tell me every document you signed in the last year, he said. Everything, even things that seemed routine, I told him. The insurance updates, a form Marcus said was related to my car title. 2 documents he'd brought me when I was recovering from back surgery. Said they were Medicare supplemental paperwork. Raymond wrote everything down without expression. Then he looked up. Dad, I need you to do something hard. I need you to act completely normal. Don't confront Marcus. Don't change anything. Don't move any money. Can you do that? I had spent 31 years managing construction projects worth tens of millions of dollars. I had coordinated teams of engineers across multiple counties, negotiated with state agencies, solved problems that would have broken most people. I can do that, I said. Good. Because if he knows we're looking, he'll move the money and disappear, and recovering it becomes nearly impossible. Raymond left before Marcus came downstairs for breakfast. I made coffee. I poured Marcus a cup. I asked him how he slept. He said, fine, thanks, and scrolled through his phone at my kitchen table. And I watched him over the rim of my mug and thought about how a man could smile at you while he was stealing your house out from under you. The next 3 weeks were the longest of my life. Raymond worked quietly through his office, pulling records, confirming what Audrey had found, and discovering things that were worse. The second mortgage was just the beginning. Marcus had also opened 2 credit cards in my name, total balance of $31,000. He'd filed a change of address with my bank without my knowledge. He'd forged my signature on a power of attorney document that hadn't been witnessed or notarized correctly, which was why it hadn't held up when he'd tried to use it at a financial institution in Columbus 3 months earlier. They had turned him away. He'd just moved on to other methods. He's been doing this to other people, Raymond told me one evening. On the phone, speaking quietly so his own family couldn't hear. We're finding 2 other victims so far, both elderly men, both widowers, both living alone. One of them lost his entire retirement savings. I stood at my kitchen window looking out at the yard I'd maintained for 22 years. The oak tree I'd planted the spring after my wife, Helen, passed. The garden she'd loved that I'd kept going, because stopping felt like losing her twice. How long has he been doing this? I asked. We think at least 4 years. Before he met Audrey, that landed differently. It meant my daughter hadn't introduced a good man to a bad life. She'd been chosen deliberately, as cover. A wife with a legitimate career gave Marcus credibility, respectability, a reason to be welcomed into the homes of people who trusted family. I thought about whether to tell her that. Decided Raymond should make that call. He was better at delivering information without letting emotion get in the way. I had never been quite so good at that. What I was good at was patience. Engineering teaches you that the difference between a bridge that stands and one that fails is almost always a problem with the foundation. Something small and invisible that nobody checked carefully enough. You learn to look slow and look close before you commit to anything. I had not looked close enough at Marcus. I wouldn't make that mistake again. Raymond came over on a Tuesday morning and sat down with me and Audrey at the kitchen table. Marcus was at his job, which turned out to be a sales position at a car dealership in Westerville. Not the regional manager role he'd told us about for years. "We're ready," Raymond said. "Attorney General's office is moving forward with criminal charges. Fraud, forgery, identity theft, elder financial exploitation. Federal prosecutor may pick it up as well given the interstate components." He looked at me steadily. "We'll need you to cooperate fully. Interviews, documents, testimony if it goes to trial. Whatever it takes," I said. "There's one more thing." Raymond looked at Audrey, then back at me. "There's no evidence Audrey knew about any of this. Her name doesn't appear on any of the fraudulent documents, but the AG's office is going to want to speak with her as a witness." Audrey had been sitting very still. She'd barely spoken during the whole meeting. Now she said, "He used me." It wasn't a question. "Yes," Raymond said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Tell me what you need." Marcus was arrested at the dealership on a Wednesday afternoon. Raymond told me later that he'd tried to act confused, claimed he didn't know what the officers were talking about, asked for his lawyer before they'd finished reading him his rights. The confusion didn't last long. When investigators showed him the documents, the accounts, the paper trail that Raymond's office had spent 3 weeks assembling, the confusion dropped away like a mask. He didn't say anything else after that. I was at my workbench in the garage when Raymond called to tell me it was done. I had a piece of black walnut I'd been shaping into a small cabinet door, hand planing it down to the thickness I needed. My hands were covered in sawdust. I set down the plane and listened to my son tell me that the man who had been stealing from me under my own roof was in custody. "You okay, Dad?" "Yes," I said, and meant it, mostly. The house felt strange that night, quieter in a way that wasn't entirely comfortable. I had grown accustomed to Marcus being there, to the sounds of another person moving through the rooms, and now that presence was gone, and I wasn't sure how I felt about the fact that I'd miss even a fake version of it. I went back to the walnut panel and worked until 10 o'clock. When your hands are busy, your mind can process things in the background, the way a computer runs programs you can't see. By the time I cleaned up and went inside, I'd worked through most of what I was feeling: anger, grief, embarrassment. And underneath all of it, something that surprised me: relief that I'd found out it all. A week after the arrest, Audrey came to see me on a Sunday afternoon. She sat in the kitchen, and I made us both tea. And for a while, neither of us said much. She had dark circles under her eyes. She hadn't been sleeping. I recognized the look because I'd seen it in my own mirror for the past month. "I keep going back through everything," she said. "Every time I missed something. Every time he was on his phone and I didn't ask. Every time he offered to handle something and I said, 'Okay.'" She wrapped her hands around her mug. "I feel like an idiot." "You're not an idiot." "Dad, he was sleeping 3 feet away from me and running a fraud operation, and I didn't see it. He was doing this before you met him. He knew how to hide it." I sat down across from her. "Audrey, I'm the one who handed him my mail and signed documents without reading them. I'm the one who let him in and made him comfortable and didn't ask hard questions because it was easier not to." She looked up. "He targeted people who trusted," I said. "That's not a character flaw. That's just being human." She was quiet for a moment. "Are you angry at me?" I thought about it, really thought about it, because she deserved an honest answer, not just a reassuring one. "No," I said. "I'm sad. There's a difference." She nodded. Her eyes filled, but she didn't let it spill over. That was my daughter, always keeping it together, even when she shouldn't have to. "What happens now?" she asked. "Raymond says the criminal case is strong. Multiple victims, clear paper trail, documented pattern." I set down my mug. "The civil suit is moving forward too. My attorney is working on recovering what can be recovered. The second mortgage is the main issue. The bank is cooperating." "And me?" The AG's office confirmed you're a witness, not a target. Your name is clean. I looked at her steadily. But you have decisions to make. She knew what I meant. She had already contacted a divorce attorney. She didn't say so, but I could see it in the way she'd stopped wearing her wedding ring, quietly, without announcement. I know, she said. We sat together until the sun started going down. I refilled our mugs. We talked about other things. Her caseload at the firm, a documentary she'd watched, whether the oak tree in the backyard needed trimming. Normal things. The kind of conversation you have when you're both processing something too big to look at directly. So you talk around it until the edges soften. Before she left, she hugged me at the door and held on a little longer than usual. I'm glad I called you, she said. I'm glad you did too, I said. I'm glad you dug. The legal process unfolded over the following months with the methodical pace that Raymond had prepared me for. Not fast, not clean, not the way things happen in movies. Real justice moves through paperwork and continuances and motions that mean nothing to a layperson, but somehow add up to consequences eventually. Marcus's attorney tried 3 times to negotiate a plea deal that would reduce the charges. The prosecutor turned down all 3. With 2 additional victims and a documented pattern spanning 4 years across 2 states, there wasn't much incentive to negotiate. One of those victims, a 71-year-old retired schoolteacher named Gerald from outside Akron, testified at a preliminary hearing. He'd lost $218,000. His life savings? He'd had to move in with his adult son because he couldn't afford the apartment he'd lived in for 14 years. Listening to him speak in that quiet, matter-of-fact way that people use when they've already cried everything out, and now they're just stating facts, I understood something about the weight of what had been done. Marcus hadn't just stolen money. He'd stolen the particular kind of dignity that comes from knowing your life is yours, that your decisions are your own, that the ground under your feet is solid. I had come close to losing that. Gerald had lost it completely. Raymond updated me regularly. The federal prosecutor had picked up the case in addition to the state charges. The total victim losses were documented at just over $600,000 across 7 victims, more than originally identified. Marcus had been doing this across Ohio and Indiana for at least 5 years, working his way through a list of targets he'd identified through a network that investigators were still untangling. 7 people, 5 years, $600,000. And he had sat at my kitchen table and drunk my coffee and pretended to be family. The morning the verdict came in, I was in the garage. I had a rocking chair I'd been building for 3 months, a commission from a neighbor down the street who was turning 70 and wanted something to sit in on her porch. I was fitting the back slats, testing the tension, making sure each piece was exactly where it needed to be. Raymond called it 11-14. Guilty on all counts, he said. Fraud, forgery, identity theft, elder financial exploitation times 7. The federal charges carry mandatory minimums. He's looking at 14 to 18 years. I set down my tools. 14 to 18 years. Marcus was 41. He'd be in his mid to late 50s when he got out. Whatever life he'd imagined for himself, the one he'd been building with stolen money and forged signatures, it was over. The recovery? I asked. Partial. The bank is reversing the second mortgage. The credit card balances have been discharged. The cash he moved is harder. Some of it is gone. But you're getting back roughly 80% of what he took. 80%. Gerald wasn't getting any of his back, or not much. That felt uneven and wrong, though I understood it wasn't something Raymond could fix. Thank you, I said, for all of it. You're my father, he said simply. That evening, Audrey called. The divorce had been finalized 2 weeks earlier. Efficient, because there had been nothing to fight over. Marcus had no assets that weren't either fraudulent or seized. Audrey had kept her own finances separate, which had been a practical decision made early in the marriage for professional reasons, and had turned out to be the most fortunate thing she'd ever done. It's done, she said. Raymond told me. Yes. A pause. Do you feel better? I thought about it. Outside my garage window, the oak tree was turning, the leaves going gold and amber in the October light. Helen had picked out that tree from a nursery 3 counties away, had driven home with it sticking out the back of the station wagon, had laughed at herself the whole way. I feel like something's been corrected, I said. Not fixed, corrected. She understood. She was a lawyer. She knew the difference. About 3 weeks after the sentencing, something happened that I hadn't expected. I was reading on my porch on a Saturday morning when a car I didn't recognize pulled up to the curb. A man got out, older than me. maybe 70, moving carefully, the way people do when their joints have started to hold opinions. He walked up to my front path and stopped. "Mr. Calloway?" he said. I recognized him after a moment. "Gerald, the school teacher from Akron." "Come sit down," I said. He climbed the porch steps slowly and settled into the chair across from mine. He had the look of a man who had been through something and was still in the process of deciding what it had made him. "I wanted to meet you," he said. "Your son's office. They told me a little about how the case started, that your daughter found it, that you cooperated from the beginning." He folded his hands in his lap. "If you hadn't, they might not have gotten him. I might never have known what happened to my money, or why." I didn't know what to say to that. So I said, "I'm sorry it happened to you." "I'm sorry it happened to you too." He looked out at the yard. "Funny thing is, I keep thinking about what I would have done differently, whether I could have seen it coming. My wife passed 4 years ago. My son lives in Arizona. I was alone. I think that's what they look for. Isolation," I said. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "After this, I joined a grief support group at my church. Started having dinner every Sunday with a neighbor. Little things." He paused. "I'm not going to be alone in the same way again." We sat on the porch for an hour. I made coffee. We talked about where we'd each grown up. His 30 years teaching high school history, my 31 years building bridges. We had more in common than I would have guessed. When he left, he shook my hand at the bottom of the steps and said, "Thank you for fighting back." "Thank you for testifying," I said. I watched his car drive down the street and turn the corner, and I thought about all the people who get targeted and never find out, who spend years wondering where the money went, who lose their grip on their own lives without ever understanding how it happened. Gerald knew. I knew. That was something. The rocking chair was finished by November. I delivered it to my neighbor on a cool Tuesday afternoon, and she sat in it right there on the porch and rocked back and forth and said it was perfect. I drove home feeling the specific, quiet satisfaction of work completed, a problem solved, something made solid and useful out of raw material. In the garage, I started a new project, a bookcase for Raymond's office, cherry wood, 6 shelves, fitted with the kind of joinery that would outlast both of us if it was built right. I had a lot of time now. The house was quieter than it had been in years, but it was my quiet, my space, my schedule. I ate when I was hungry and went to bed when I was tired, and nobody was monitoring what I did or steering me toward decisions that served their interests instead of mine. I had not understood until I lost it how much that mattered. The simple, unglamorous fact of owning your own days. Audrey came for Thanksgiving. Raymond brought his wife and their 2 kids, who were 7 and 10, and who talked over each other constantly, and argued about everything, and filled the house with a noise that felt like the best possible kind of disorder. We ate too much, and the kids wanted to see the garage, and I showed them the bookcase in progress, and explained how the dovetail joints worked, and the 10-year-old actually listened, which I found quietly remarkable. After dinner, Raymond and I washed dishes together while Audrey put the kids to bed with a story. "How are you, really?" he asked. "Good," I said. "Better than I thought I'd be. You seem like yourself." "I am myself." I handed him a rinsed plate. "That's the thing, Raymond. I had a year where I was starting to feel like I wasn't quite sure who was running my life. Little things. The way Marcus would redirect conversations. The way decisions got made without me quite noticing. I'd agreed to anything. I thought it was just getting older. Losing sharpness." I paused. It wasn't me losing sharpness. It was someone deliberately making me feel that way. Raymond was quiet for a moment. "That's one of the things that makes elder financial exploitation so effective," he said. "It mimics normal aging. Victims blame themselves." I know. I blamed myself for about 3 weeks. I handed him another plate. Then I decided that was a waste of time. He laughed. It was good to hear him laugh. Later that evening, after everyone had gone, I sat in the living room with a cup of tea and no sound but the house settling around me. On the shelf above the fireplace, there were photographs. Helen and me at our wedding 38 years ago. Raymond at his law school graduation. Audrey at the bar exam results. Phone in hand, that particular disbelieving smile. The 4 of us at a beach in the Outer Banks, the summer before Helen got sick. No photograph of Marcus, of course. His presence in this house had been erased efficiently and completely, the way you pull a bad fitting from a joint and true the wood back to flat. But the frame where a photo of him had sat for 6 years was still there. I hadn't gotten around to replacing it. I got up and went to my desk and found a picture I'd always liked but never printed. Raymond and Audrey as kids, 8 and 10, sitting on the porch of the house my parents had owned in Chillicothe. Raymond was explaining something with complete seriousness, and Audrey was clearly about to argue with him. And you could see even in that moment exactly who they were going to become. I said it in the frame. Much better. A few months after the sentencing, I received a letter. No return address. But I recognized the handwriting on the envelope, precise and controlled. The handwriting of a man who had once told me he'd studied calligraphy. I didn't open it right away. I set it on my workbench and looked at it while I sanded a piece of cherry wood, and I thought about what a letter from Marcus could possibly contain that I wanted to read. Curiosity won out, the way it generally does. It was 4 paragraphs. He said he had time to think. He said he understood now what he'd done. He said he was sorry for what it was worth, which he acknowledged was probably not much. The last paragraph asked if there was any possibility, someday, of a conversation. I read it twice, then I put it back in the envelope and put the envelope in a drawer. I wasn't ready to throw it away. I wasn't ready to respond to it either. Ready is a word that means something different to a 64-year-old man than it does to a younger one. I had learned, over 6 decades, that some things take longer than you expect, and that rushing them doesn't help. The wood teaches you that. You can force a joint together before it's ready and it'll hold for a while, and then one day it'll fail in exactly the place you forced it. Some things have to come together in their own time, or not at all. I put Marcus's letter in the drawer and went back to the bookcase. The second shelf needed fitting. I had good wood, sharp tools, and enough light coming through the garage window to see what I was doing. I got back to work. Outside, Ohio was doing what Ohio does in late winter. Gray sky, bare trees, the particular stubborn cold that makes you wonder every year why you didn't move somewhere warmer. But the garage was warm enough with the space heater running, and the cherry wood smelled the way good wood always smells, clean and honest, like something that had taken a long time to become what it was. I was 64 years old. I had survived 31 years of construction sites, a year of being quietly stolen from, and the specific grief of finding out that someone you called family had chosen to see you as an opportunity instead of a person. I still had my house. I still had my yard and Helen's oak tree, and my garage full of tools and projects and purpose. I still had Raymond and Audrey, both of them steady and decent, in ways that I was enormously proud of and tried not to say too often, because they'd get embarrassed. And I still had my work. Boards becoming shelves, raw material becoming something solid and lasting. Problems with solutions, if you took the time to look carefully enough and refused to rush what needed patience. That's the thing nobody tells you about getting older. You start to understand, in a way you couldn't when you were young, exactly what you have. You stop taking for granted the ordinary weight of a life that belongs to you. Marcus had tried to take that from me. He had nearly succeeded. He was in a federal correctional facility in Pennsylvania, and I was in my garage in Columbus building a bookcase for my son. And time was moving forward exactly the way time does, steady and indifferent, and full of whatever you decide to put in it. I put my hands back on the wood and kept building.